And there ends one of the most dominant streaks in the history of sport. India have lost a test series at home for the first time since 2012, and it is New Zealand. They who had not won a test here in 36 years before this. They who had won only one test series in Asia in the last 15 years, who managed to breach the fortress and conquer what is called the toughest challenge in the modern day history of cricket. Welcome to ESPN Cricinfo Match Day. We are joined by Sanjay Manjrekar to look back in a moment that will go down in history, Sanjay, and even in a year which has produced some remarkable storylines in international cricket, you'd imagine this ranks right up top.
Right up there. And that has to be the biggest story and the biggest takeaway from the way New Zealand have destroyed India in the first test when, the conditions suited them. In the second test when the conditions suited the opposition. I mean, to annihilate India in two test matches in completely different conditions tells you a lot about this New Zealand team. And it's been a great week for New Zealand with their women's team against all odds, winning the T20 Women's World Cup. So well done, New Zealand. It's a small little island down there that's making waves in world cricket, which is brilliant.
Yeah, always known for punching above their weight, and my God, haven't both their teams done just that in the last couple of weeks? And I'd want to stress a bit more on the context of this for New Zealand, Sanjay, because you look back at the last 40 years, I think they've won only three series in Asia, and two of them were against Bangladesh in their early years. You look at their record in India, you look at how they were hammered in their most recent test in Sri Lanka before this, just a month ago. For this complete uptick to happen, what do you attribute it to?
Um, when I look at the scores that were there in Sri Lanka, when New Zealand lost in Sri Lanka, there was still some promise there with the bat. They got enough runs, so the batting was sort of good enough. Maybe the bowling wasn't as good as the Sri Lankan bowling because they had New Zealand collapses. They had them collapse a few times. So maybe on the batting front, there was a constant improvement. And I think few new players that have come in, Rachin, for example, excellent player of spin. And the start that they had at Bangalore, 46 all out, that was just the kind of dose of confidence. It was actually an overdose of confidence that came through. They still had to fight for that win. But after that win, when you came to Pune, you saw a New Zealand team that believed in themselves, but this was going to be a test of adjustment, test of their skills in Asian conditions, and they came through with flying colors. So there was promise in Sri Lanka despite the defeat in the batting department. But boy, the way they bowled in Bangalore on day one, they've been brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, just want to complete the thread of New Zealand's success in this game, and obviously Mitchell Santner is the star. 7 in the first inning, 6 in the second. First, you want to take us through what you saw of him in the second innings after the damage he'd already caused in the first?
See, what is happening increasingly for the visiting teams, Steve Waugh was one of the first guys to call it the final frontier, winning in India. Until then, nobody really, cared too much about winning India. Even if they lost in India, they didn't mind. But Steve Waugh actually, put that as the real challenge. And since then, numerous trips have happened to India. And every time you see a team returning with slightly different plans, learning from their earlier lessons. For example, the spinners that you see now coming with foreign teams are guys who bowl quickly and accurately. Gone are those days when they used to come with their quality spinners who reveled in all other conditions, but flight and guile doesn't work in India. You need a Mitchell Santner kind bowler who really just bowl accurately and quickly, flatter. And all three spinners you saw, Ijaz Patel, maybe he found it the most difficult to be like Santner. Glenn Phillips did the same thing. You saw with England as well. When they came with the spinner, they picked particular kind of spinners who were quick in the air and had a flatter trajectory. So teams are learning, and Mitchell Santner did exactly what those kind of spinners are supposed to do: bowl accurately. Some balls turn, some don't. His 6 wickets in the second inning, you'll find that 4 were off balls that came back in, and 2 that left, that turned away. So that's how it goes.
Does that then explain what, to anyone who views the scorecard later, will come as a big stark contrast? Because Santner's finished with what you'd imagine are Jadeja like figures for these kind of conditions in a game where Jadeja actually has had a much tougher outing than he usually does.
Yes, but what happens is that this often happens. Jadeja that we've seen in the last series as well against Bangladesh, and now is not the Jadeja in form at the peak of his performances of form, and that happens to any player. There are certain dips, and he's now bowling a little dip in form, and hence the comparison seems there seems to be a large difference in the way they bowl and the returns as well. But let's not forget another thing that foreign teams are doing. They're using the reverse sweep so much, and many years back, Mike Gatting played that shot. He was lynched for it. Now you see the common sense or playing that shot against somebody like a Jadeja, because when you reverse sweep him, you're basically actually playing with the turn as against the normal sweep. So actually, the reverse sweep is a safer shot. And we saw Ben Duckett, give India nightmares, Indian spinners, Ollie Pope as well. So more and more foreign batters, I'm sure, exchanging notes away from India, saying pull out that reverse sweep and the sweep. And Indian spinners are finding it a little more difficult. And both Ashwin and Jadeja clearly are guys who are not at the top of the game at the moment. But the challenge for them is getting a little tougher. All these vanquished teams are just learning from their previous visits.
Right. As tough as it may have been for India's bowlers, the story of this series is India's batting, and let's focus on that and start with this second innings effort. Chasing 359, why is it that every batter other than Yashasvi Jaiswal and then Jadeja at the end perhaps looked so much at sea?
Yeah, when Yashasvi and Shubman Gill were going together, I mean, playing together, I thought, there could be a surprise around the corner because the kind of shots that they were playing, especially Yashasvi Jaiswal, but unfortunate that he got out. Shubman Gill clearly doesn't have the feel for spinners like you see batters who are comfortable against spin. They can work around with their footwork quite easily and instinctively. He clearly is under a little bit of pressure when it comes to spinners and turning pitches. So that is his issue. Well, Virat Kohli again, I thought misjudged the length. The ball was a little fuller. I know it came back in sharply, but it was supposed to in the way it was released. Rohit Sharma earlier got out because he wasn't confident at the crease. So there are a lot of guys out there. In fact, top three batters of the four, I've just told you, are guys who were short in confidence against spin. And that, just contributed to what happened later.
Yeah, and it also paints a picture that while this has been an increasingly long trouble for India, it's not like the top order returns at home have been the highest in the last few years. They have so many times been bailed out by lower order efforts. That didn't happen in these two games, and we've seen two losses.
Yes, and it's bound to happen. Things will not keep happening in the same fashion. But another very important point that I missed out yesterday as well and today is that on a pitch like this in India, typically you'll see it react best and most difficult for batters to play spin in the first session and a half. So now, in hindsight, I'm thinking if India had just maybe backed their defense a little more and had they just maybe seen that first section through with not too many wickets down, things were bound to get easier. I know Ashwin and Jadeja are experienced players. They are good players of spin. But the pitch also, post lunge, close to tee, post tee, tends to get easier. And if India had wickets in hand, people like Pant and Sarfaraz and others, Jadeja, Ashwin down the order, it would have been a much closer game. The problem is India just lost too many wickets in that uh, first section and the hour after that.
It is in these troubling circumstances that usually, if you look through the course of history, it is your experienced batters, your star batters who then shine through. Do we now need to look at the macro picture of this home season so far? 8 innings each, Rohit Sharma and Virat Kohli between them have less than 300 runs.
Yes, so you can say guys who are out of form, and that is something that happens. Now the selectors and the team management, Rohit Sharma is part of that team management, conflict of interest there to decide about his own future. But you just have to gauge in the way they're batting, and can we hope for that form to come back quickly? And how good will they be when they return? And nobody can confidently say that it's time to move on from Rohit Sharma because now after this test, let's forget about this series. Even if India wins, it won't matter that much. But the next challenge will be Australia. And for that, you need Virat Kohli and Rohit Sharma. And who knows, they might just find that second win that we talk about. So at the moment, you have to look at these players who are out of form, and typically what haunts a player who is, at that age, at that stage of his career, is it just gets a little more difficult. Happened to the great Tendulkar as well when you looked at his last 25, 30 test matches. But Australia will tell us the real story.
For both Rohit and the team management, there's also the tactical side of things to perhaps ponder upon when you assess, say, the toss and the lineup from the first game, the batting approach in the first innings of the second test, defensive fields, which you brought up on numerous occasions in these innings. Uh, have the tactical mistakes cost India this series?
Not really. I mean, 46 all out shouldn't have been the case for a decision that wasn't. People didn't say that that was blunderous at the time, because I remember, I think it was Simon Dool and Murli Karthik looking at the pitch, and they also couldn't say with any finality what a captain should do. So India backed themselves, batted first, but 46 all out is a problem. It should have been 180 all out or something like that, and the series would have panned out differently. So tactics, yes. But the bigger sort of reason for this defeat is first New Zealand. You have to say, well done, New Zealand, hundreds of times, and then start looking at India's flaws. I'll say this though, that move to have Sarfaraz Khan batting down the order and sending Washington Sundar up before him because he's a left-hander now, those kind of things shouldn't happen. It's just bizarre that an informed batter who's just got 150 doesn't come into bat at his position just because he happens to be a right-hander. I mean, that is just something I can't understand, and that is where common sense goes flying out of the window, because here you're thinking a left-hander of Washington Sundar's ability is better against a Mitchell Santner than a Sarfaraz Khan. So that is one thing Rohit Sharma has to be careful of. The T20 sort of thinking of matchups and left hand, right hand. I think he should just go by the overall quality and ability of players.
Let's talk about Rohit's partner, Gautam Gambhir. This is about as tough an initiation as he could have imagined. India lost an ODI series to Sri Lanka for the first time since 1997. They've now lost this proud test record at home. Not been the greatest start.
Yes, and Gautam Gambhir happens to be in that seat at that time. And I will still maintain that the coach has minimum influence on the team, lesser than your 11th weakest player in the team, because he doesn't set foot on the ground. The captain is in charge of most things out there. But you've got to applaud him for Washington Sundar's selection, which was, an immediate hit. But, things like sending Washington Sundar ahead of Sarfaraz Khan, or, maybe in hindsight, as we suggested here, maybe four spinners would have made things a little easier. Akash was almost like a non-entity. So those things will be discussed and would be made a note of, but to put any sort of responsibility on the door of Gautam Gambhir would be terribly unfair. And in cricket, at least until now, we can't do it because the coach has minimum influence on the performances.
Right. So pivoting back to the players, finally, Sanjay, I would like a sense of the players' perspective when you have a record as proud as this one. I mean, there are some people in this team who have tasted a home series defeat for the first time in long careers. Think of Jadeja, think of Ashwin, Kohli, Rohit. Some of them have lost before, but the larger point being they're not used to this. How much will this hurt? What will it tell them?
Uh, I love this generation for one reason. If you see them playing in the next game, you won't see any signs of them, with their heads down. We used to take all these things very seriously. We used to be a lot more emotional. These guys have a sense of, confidence, and they look at this as a little, stumble. And it is a stumble. I mean, when you have a record of 18 consecutive series win, you can't be too hard on a team that has lost one series. Lessons learned, but you'll see them, in Mumbai coming out with the same kind of swag. And what do you tell? I mean, you can't tell a Sarfraz Khan to bat differently or Rishabh Pant to bat differently. Maybe Shubman Gill is close to being a little orthodox, maybe a few coaching tips that were given. But I'm sure they'll be on the job quickly. And I don't see, they will be obviously disappointed, but don't expect them to be hurting and playing in that fashion, as in with their heads down in the last test. Don't forget the Wanderers test match when they lost two test match in South Africa, how they came back and won the final test.
Mm. It will be a unique position for India when they reach
Yes.
Wankhede for this last test because you will have to go back to Mumbai 2004. That's the last time India entered a home test knowing that they are out of the series and there's still more left to play. So, yeah, that is it. History for New Zealand, history ending for India. Thank you so much, Sanjay Manjrekar, for your time and company.